Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, I like to first stop for a moment to thank my guests because I know they're coming with a couple of things I deem very expensive. And I want to thank you, Mike, for coming and spending some of that, I call it the commodity of time. Thank you so much, sir, because I know the importance of it and you're willing to share some of that with me and the audience. We appreciate it. The other is your journey, sir. That houses wisdom, pain, sacrifice, all the things that made you who you are today. And we are honored that you're here to open up and share it with us. And we thank you and we welcome you to Threads of Enlightenment. Thank you so much for coming.
Hey, thank you so much, Ken. Looking forward to spend some time with you in the audience. Every single day, I start my day with a simple prayer, which is help me help people. And so whether that's someone reading one of my books or speaking on a podcast, working with some clients, whatever it might be, helping out at my son's school, etc., that's my goal. So help me help people. And I do that through a number of different ways. As Ken mentioned, I have lots of different books. And my first book has over 1,000 reviews, Speak with No Fear. There's much more than just speaking in it. And then I'm super proud to say that a traditional publisher picked up my newest book, and it comes out December 8th. It's called Speak with Confidence, and so much about it is just general confidence, the framework there that's for speaking. So I really believe that would be very valuable to your audience, to anybody listening. It's going to be something that's going to be a fantastic, really great book to kick off a new year with. And that's just Speak with Confidence. And there's lots of other things that I do in coaching programs, public speaking. But today we're going to talk about some enlightenment and how to grow and where we come from, and looking forward to sharing my story.
Excellent. Folks, you heard the heart of a servant, and that's where we're all called to live, I believe. And when you live in that space, Mike, life becomes beautiful, tasty, as they say. There's some flavor to it when we live a life of a servant. I want to thank you for coming, and I want you to tell the people, Mike, and I always go back to the beginning. Tell them about your family. How was that family unit? Because I believe that's where you and I are given birth in the form of our how we perceive life, how we perceive the world, how we perceive people, and based on our perception, we then govern our lives. Talk to us about your life, your situation with your family. How was that?
Yeah, our lives are really made up of the decisions that went before us and the decisions that we make. And I know that Ken likes to talk about creating your life, and really the decisions that we choose create that life that we're going to live. But it's not just the decisions that we make, it's also the decisions that other people make. And so if I go back in time and look at it, I have my mom's story, my dad's story. My mom's story comes from a very traditional, conservative, Irish Catholic, very integrated, very holistic, great family right there, 9 kids. And yet there was some trauma that happened to my mom along the way. And then my dad comes from a crazy background with, there's murderers in the background and all kinds of stuff, and crazy, like people who rig things. And they were all like high white collar jobs and stuff, doctors and such.
Yeah.
And early on, my mom and dad, when they got together, they were drug smuggling. So really what they did is that they learned Spanish, and my dad learned how to fly planes. So they could go down to Colombia, cut out the middleman, and load up his plane, load up his 6 boats, load up his fleet of planes, and fly back and forth and go back and forth between Colombia and the United States. Now, when they decided to start having kids, they decided that that wasn't the best life for them to build a family on. And I love that decision right there. They didn't just think about themselves and what was fun and adventurous and made a lot of money. They looked at the kids they were going to bring into the world. And I think this is great, that the choices that we make don't just make us, but they also make a life for others. And so my parents decided, you know what, we're not going to do this anymore. And so they relinquished that life. And through a series of happenstances and God ordained circumstances, they end up becoming fully committed followers of Jesus when I was about 4-ish. My mom at that point in time was a practicing witch, seances and astral projection. And so she had a whole bunch of different things, spell books. So she burned those. My dad got rid of his life of drugs, paraphernalia, and they fully dove in. They celebrated Christmas for the first time thinking about Jesus when they were in Hawaii right after they became Christians, and
Mhm.
they celebrated with the Love family, which is kind of a
Yeah.
commune, hippie commune. And so they all smoked pot and ate Happy Birthday Jesus cake. So that was the world I was brought into. That was the world I was brought into. And
That's
I
a
have these
colorful
stories of
place, though.
a very
That's a
colorful place.
colorful place.
Yeah,
It has some opportunities, if you will, Mike, for some personal development that will be a little different than the others that are brought up in this family. So, talk to me about some of those beautiful opportunities of colorful lifestyle that you had with your parents. I love it. Smoke
oh
some
yeah.
weed, hooked up with Jesus, celebrate. There's nothing more beautiful than that. At least
well,
their intention, if you will, was on the right place. So talk to me as to how you, when you were brought into this place, how were you affected as a young
yeah,
man watching your parents maneuver in their life as you were brought in there?
yeah. So interesting, right? So here, this is the story I'm brought into, but my parents changed right at the moment that my consciousness was really coming into being, really being
Yeah,
aware of those memories. So right after, some of my earliest memories are where my parents decided that we were going to spend several months in Eastern Asia and just do missions. We smuggled Bibles into China. And so
yeah,
in
wow.
1985, my dad said, I wasn't worried about being caught because I'd been smuggling for years and never gotten caught. So I wasn't worried about being caught. So I remember this like bringing Bibles into communist China in 1985. Back then, that was like
Yeah,
really illegal.
really, I remember that. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And here we are on these trains. And so some of my earliest adventures are faith-filled and adventures,
hmm,
really going out there and doing things and trying things that are risky.
yeah,
And those two values, I've stayed with those for the
yeah,
last 35, 40 years. So how old am I?
yeah,
And as I look at it, still going for adventures and still faith-filled. And even that third component that I said at the beginning, wanting to help people. And my
yeah,
parents had switched over to that. So from early on, we were helping out AIDS victims in the 80s, back when you thought you could get it from a toilet seat, and all
yeah,
kinds of different things. And my parents were involved in helping people in the streets of Seattle. And that's stayed with me as well. And I love that my dad's still doing it. So what have I done on that? Okay, so we
yeah,
moved back to the United States. We're after all this travel stuff, and we're just going to settle
yeah.
in a little suburb. And I found out that I had a speech impediment. Now, I'm a public
Mm,
speaker and I teach people how to speak. I have a book
yeah,
called Speak with Confidence. Yet,
yeah,
how do I get to that spot? And I think a lot of times in our life, we think that, oh man, that person had that given to them.
yeah,
But reality is, some of the best teachers in something are people who had to learn that from scratch. And for
yes,
me, as a kid, I had the inability to say the sound "ja," and I couldn't differentiate between the words shoulder and soldier. Those just
hmm,
sounded the same, and I couldn't say them differently. And I had to work on those again and again and again and again. And so I had to work on overcoming this. And I was embarrassed because there's nothing like when you speak and somebody keeps on saying, "What'd you say? What'd you say?
yeah, yeah,
What'd you say?" And even that sound, "What'd you?" I couldn't even do
yeah,
that. And so it was very difficult for me, and yet I was motivated, and my mom helped me get there, and I put in the work. So I finally got to this spot where now I'm thriving in elementary school. And you know that moment in time in your life where you look back on and it's just amazing. Third and fourth grade were those
yeah,
years. I'd overcome the speech impediment. I was doing poetry contests. I was doing spelling bees. I was doing the science fairs. And I know we're going back, but we're going back for a reason because a
hmm,
lot, Ken talks about trauma a whole bunch. And there's this trauma that happened when I was in fourth grade and my dad comes home and I'm at the prime of my life, best friends, all kinds of different things happening. And my dad comes home. He says, I quit my job. He was then, he had switched into being a lawyer. He had quit
yeah,
his job in stable, professional, corporate culture. And he said, we're moving to Mexico.
wow,
And I and the whole family were not so excited about that.
wow. That
So,
is
Yeah,
That
go
is
for it.
powerful. Let me interject here because the reason why
Yeah,
I talk about it, Mike, is because I tell them when it happens, and it's usually an incident, and how
yeah,
we interpret that incident is how we are going to see the world for a pretty long time until we have to deal with it again. That, and I call it, Mike, the statement of faith that we make. We make an internal statement which says, I'm not going to do this. I am not going to do that, and whatever. And that statement will govern us for a mighty long time. So go
it's
ahead
true.
that, about your incident. And what was that statement, Mike, when that happened? Because that is a traumatic situation. How did you interpret it looking back, 2020 hindsight? How did you interpret that information when your dad came, and what did it
Yeah,
do to you?
and our words are so powerful, right? This is why,
Yeah,
like, even in my book, Speak with Confidence, it's so powerful because we want to speak, and what we say and what we don't say and what we hold back from saying
yeah,
has so much power in our lives. And so some of the words I said at that point in time were things like, "This is going to be awful."
yeah,
And for the next several years, I combated those words. It
yeah,
indeed was awful for a lot of different areas. I'm going to hate this. And once
yeah,
again, I'm losing everything. And I felt that. And so I said a lot of those different things that in retrospect, I then lived and that became a
yeah,
prophecy in my life that I lived for the next several years. And the whole family did. So we went down to
yeah,
Mexico and it was a traumatic time going from just a really great life. And then all of a sudden we're in this unknown. So we
yeah,
drove down to Mexico, took about a couple of weeks to get there, go into a house, and I cried the first night. And there's ups and downs in that first year, and met some friends, lost some friends, et cetera, et cetera. In that regards, got in an accident, all kinds of different things. But one of the things that happened was I went to a all Mexican school in rural, or not rural, inner city Mexican school. And
mhm,
I was the only one who spoke English. They were the only ones, and I didn't speak any Spanish. And I remember the whole school rallying around me when my dad dropped me off, quite literally met with the principal, dropped me off, said, "Mike, I'll pick you up at 3." And the whole school, and by the way, it's fun to laugh at and reimagine now. It wasn't fun at the
yeah,
time. And I did talk to a
yeah,
counselor many years later about it because it was traumatic.
yeah,
And you're like, imagine, okay, so like, imagine you are the only you. I'm tall, white, gangly, big, huge buck teeth at the time. So I talked like this to cover my teeth. So I used to mumble
yeah,
because I didn't want people to see my huge teeth. And the entire school rallies around me and pointing fingers at me, teachers included. I have no idea what they're saying. They're all
yeah,
laughing. And then they would send emissaries to run up and touch me, like on my shoulder and stuff. And they'd say, "What's your
yeah.
name?" And then finally, a teacher came and grabbed me and pulled me uh, with a couple girls, pulled me into a classroom. And that was my fifth grade classroom.
Wow.
And I was now in front of everybody, and I'd get up there and try to do stuff, and everybody would laugh at me. That happened for a couple of
Yeah.
years. And here's what's so interesting: speaking trauma or an upfront trauma. I talk a lot about speaking wounds in some of my books can
Hmm.
actually stay with you in such a way that if you don't deal with it, it becomes this nervousness, anxiety when you're in front of people.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
would get so nervous that I would actually put myself into psychosomatic fevers on a weekly basis. My mom would say, "You
Wow.
can't be sick again." But because I hated it so much, I would get
Yeah.
sick. And that happened on and off all the way up to about seventh grade. In seventh grade, because everybody laughed at me on stage, I switched my speaker identity to being more of a serious, the hyper person you see right now, to being the class
Yeah.
clown. And I
Oh.
quite literally changed who I was. And because of that aspect around me. Okay, fast forward from there, finally got to a spot of comfort. Finally got to a spot where I really embraced Mexican culture. I was more Mexican than I was American. All my friends
Yeah.
said that as well. And I was going to go to law school in Mexico and I was enrolled, all this kind of stuff. And then we moved back to the United States when I was 18.
Wow.
And then I had to start all over. So I want to encourage people here today when you look back at your life and look at
Hmm.
some of these major movements. One is if you have a major movement coming, try not to resist it as much as you hear me
Yes.
resisting some of the ones that happened to me, because
Yes.
that resistance is just added pain. And the
Yeah.
more that you can embrace it, if I look back and the more I could have embraced it, the better the journey would have been. And then the second thing I want to encourage you is get help before you need it. A lot of times we look at our life and we're like, well, I need help. I'm gonna get some help. Finally, I'm broken apart. I'm crying for no reason, or I'm
Yeah.
depressed and I need help, obviously now. But get help before you need it. It's better to
Yeah.
change your oil, not when the engine's broken, but when the engine's doing fine and it's been a little while. So change the oil in your life, change your perspective, change your attitude, change your words before you're forced to do it because there's just no going back. Those are some of the lessons I learned at that point in time.
Yeah.
I'll pause right there and
They're
let you
powerful.
reflect on
No, no,
that.
those are powerful lessons. Those that's why you're here, because I want you to talk to that, so that those that are listening, that from Mike, if you're in a situation, here is someone that has been there, and that's, you know, how I always do it here at Threads is I point people back to you. I want you guys to get in touch with Mike, buy his books and all of those different things that he has, get into his courses, because here is someone who's gone through it, and he will be able to assist you to get through yours. It's like having a private tutor. And that's what I tell people. I said, when you have a coach, it's like having a private tutor that has been through the stuff, that knows all the pitfalls, that can say to you, hey, knows the questions to ask you, because they know the results that that question will bring. And you are hooked up, as they say, and you haven't been able to pull yourself from the matrix, as people to call it, because you're busy working and doing all the other things, that you haven't stopped long enough to ask those questions. Mike has been there. He knows what to ask on your behalf. So, Mike, here you are. Those are some traumatic incidents, and I tell people how you look at your perspective in everything determines how you go through that situation. So,
Mhm.
most of us, and I tell people to be very careful about what you say, because we find ourselves prophesying on our lives. And
Mhm.
there's a couple of principles I know in Jewish tradition. You have to learn how to bless yourself. And most people don't do that. And we respond, as you said, this is going to be X, this is going to be bad, this is going to be that. And we actually manifest it because we have released that energy, that purpose, and it comes and gives it back to us. So here you are, you're back in the States, 18 years old. How did you
Right.
respond to that trauma of coming back here? How did you fit in, and what did it do to you again, Mike?
Yeah, I think there's a yet another identity shift in my life because
Yeah,
it was actually my senior year of high school, and that's a horrible time to move. And
yeah,
at that point in time, I'd then been with those friends and those classmates for 5 years and
yeah,
really had gotten to a spot of peace, of comfort where people knew me, where I knew people, best friends, etc. Still friends today,
wow,
still people that I talk to today from that area of life. And so I move up to the United States and I'm 18, going into a brand new area. I didn't want to go to a new school and be the senior, stand out, and I was accepted to a prestigious in Mexico. You go straight to law school, and I was accepted to a prestigious law school for the next year. So I have this like, what do I do for this year?
yeah,
And I ended up going to clup out of my high school year, and basically I went
mm,
to a community college and took a whole bunch of tests, took one class, and skipped my 12th grade. Now, it sounds cool, and it's like, oh yeah, you skipped 12th grade and that kind of stuff. But at the time, I was embarrassed by it because I was going to this private academy and I was going to this
yeah,
prestigious university, and I graduated ostensibly by going through a community college. Nowadays, I'm like, well, whatever, that's great. But back then, there was this like, oh my gosh, what happened? But I was
yeah,
also caught up in some excitement. I met some new people, dated a girl, etc. Those kind of things that kind of grab a hold of you. So
hmm,
really, I got caught up in excitement, but I wasn't dealing with some of the embarrassment that I
yeah,
shouldn't have had, but I still had a lot of embarrassment we shouldn't have, but we have.
yep,
And I wasn't dealing with some of the loss, like 5 years of
yep,
friendships and that.
hmm,
And that happens on a regular basis. For example, sometimes people get out of a long-term relationship And then they start immediately dating someone, and they haven't dealt with the pain and the trauma
Mm-hmm.
of that
Yeah.
loss of a long
Yeah.
relationship. And they're so caught up in the excitement of the new one that they
Yeah.
don't even realize that it's there, or
Yeah.
their new job, or whatever it might be. And so I was caught up in the new and excitement, even while not dealing with a lot of the loss and some of the pain of, once again, a major move in my life,
Yeah.
and not fitting in. In Mexico, you grammatically, you change some of the ways that you speak. And so it took me
Mm-hmm.
years to learn how to speak in a way that was grammatically correct, because I would
Yeah.
switch things around. And people say, "Why did you say it like that?" I'm like, okay, that's why. So all that to say, finally, I get to a spot where, okay, what am I going to do? And I had my life mapped out. And what am I going to do? And I sat down, and so here's something huge for everybody here. I sat down and I wrote out a statement for my life.
Mm-hmm.
And for the last 20 plus years since I wrote that when I was around 19, my life has been very connected to that statement. Now it's ebbed
Yeah.
and flowed and switched a little bit, but the elements in that original statement have stayed with me for
Mm-hmm.
20 plus years. In fact, recently, because I talked so much about identity in my book, Speak with Confidence, I did a
Yeah.
quick little workbook that I put out on Amazon only. It's called the Identity Workbook. And it's just a way for people to determine who they are.
Yeah.
And so at around 19 years old, I determined who I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then, with many ups and downs, loss of my mom, loss of other things, changes, struggle with infertility, and on, one of the threads that kept me going was having a basic idea of who I was and
Yeah.
what value I had and what value to bring. So let me just turn it back to the audience for a moment and just encourage you and ask you, who are you?
Yeah.
In fact, when I'm working with my public speaking clients, I have a program called the Public Speaking School. And when I'm working with them, a lot of times we're working on stage presence, and people want to work on skills, and they want to work on how to organize their thoughts. And those are all great ways to speak with confidence. But
Mm-hmm.
here's what I found out is who you are determines how you say something and what you say.
Yeah.
So really, the way that I coach people is starting with, who are you? What makes you unique? What makes you valuable? Let's start with that. Let's start with knowing who you are. And then we can talk about how to present yourself.
Guys, you listening? Get in touch with Mike, get his books, because housed within those books are those wisdom. You've heard me said it many times, and I mentioned it earlier. I call it, Mike, I call it our statement of faith. You must have it. It will guide your life. Why? Because once you've fine tuned and get your statement of faith, you will then incorporate the plans that are necessary to bring it to pass. The reason why people are circulating and circular in their life is because they haven't decided what they want. And the human individual, the human being himself, is designed to have that bullseye. Once you give it to him, he will, with your association and your help, as far as putting the work in, as they say, studying, doing whatever, that will come to pass. I am telling you. The reason why it haven't is because you haven't decided. Mike asked the question, who are you? You don't know who you are because you don't know who you are. You haven't been able to move. But once you find out that stuff and you write your statement of faith, it'll guide you, man. I'm telling you. Mike, you have gotten your statement. You understand the principles as I'm listening to your story, man. You had some insight into a lot of the personal development tools that people talk about, but you recognize it as a young man and you implement it and you got your results. Here you are, you made your statement, you began to move through. As anything, I tell people, your statement is simply a compass when a plane is going to any country, any location. It's not a straight line. It goes up and down. It changes according to the turbulence. You're going to have some turbulence, guys, but it's okay. You got your statement of faith and it will guide you and bring you back and keep you moving to your destination. Don't lose it. It's inside. Find it and began to move forward. Mike, you got your statement. You began to walk through life. I know you mentioned some of your mother. I know we were also in a time frame, and I wanted to make it within that time. Talk to us as you began to grow in statutes as a young man, when you began to deal with some of those things that you put off, emotional dark places. How did you recognize what they were, and what did you do to start getting some help?
Yeah. So I got to the spot, right, where I graduated college in the United States and then go back to Mexico, started establishing a life for myself. I'm doing well. I'm getting recognized. I'm growing an NGO. I'm doing some good things. And all of a sudden, I get the call that my mom was in a car accident.
Oh,
And then during that time, I got promoted as well afterwards. And so now I'm actually leading as an executive director. I'm doing well. Lots of good things are happening in my life. I'm sitting at home. I've dealt with the initial trauma of my mom's loss. It's several months later. And so I'm sitting at home. I got a new house. I'm doing fine financially. I have a recognized position of leadership. And I'm sitting there, and all on the outside, everything's good. Yeah, I mean, everybody knows I lost my mom 6, 7 months ago at that point in time, but everything else is pretty darn good. And I'm sitting home, and I just started to whelm up with tears. Now, at that point in time, I did not cry easy in my life,
mhm.
and I thought, why do I have tears? Why do I have this happening to me? What's happening? I just felt like there was something broken.
Yeah.
I'd never officially gone to a counselor, and I always thought that was for people who are broken and
Broken,
needy
yeah.
and such and depressed,
Mhm.
and I wasn't that, and I didn't figure out what's going on with me. So I'm listening to a podcast at that point in time, and the podcast guy said that he had just recently gone to a counselor, and then I was listening to a different podcast, and that guy talked about going to a counselor, and then I'm reading a book, and these are all people I respect and admire, and she talked
Yeah.
about going to a counselor. So I thought, oh my gosh, within 5 days, I heard three people talk about going to a counselor. So I
Yeah.
reached out to one of the guys on the podcast and said, what was your counselor that you went to? So I drove 2 hours to go meet with this counselor. I show
Wow.
up, and she says, what do you want to talk about? And I said, I don't really know. I just figured it would be a good thing to do. And I just started venting and talking and just like this and talking about everything. And then she paused me. She said, talk more about that. And I just lost it.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, this thing that I touched on went a lot deeper.
Mhm.
And I'd say that that began the journey of me being more in touch with my emotions over the last 15 plus years. And it was such a huge part that nowadays I actually do check-ins. So even if I don't have anything major to do, I'll go meet with a counselor and just kind of discuss a little bit, and then move on with life
Yeah.
after I kind of do that. I would just encourage everybody here today that if there's even something that I'm just touching on, and there's just things that happen in life, and counselors are so good because there's someone who's trained to kind of ask the right questions and process it
Yeah.
with you and allows you a chance. Great friends help, obviously, that way you can talk, great family members, but something about a person who's trained in the way that your mind's going to process it, and they can point you to some really good things. So at that point in time, kind of became this integrated person, and then the rest of my journey became that I spent the next about 12, 13 years in this nonprofit world, got married, built a life. And after 18 years of one line of work, I was ready for a change. And it was a
Mhm.
dramatic change from working in a nonprofit sector where it's all about impact to a corporate sector where really the driving thrust is money. So I
Yeah.
went from impact driven to finance driven. And
Yeah.
when you look at life, that was a huge, massive, massive shift. And
Yep.
once again, what did I do? Ken, I actually went back to my original statement I did as a 19-year-old that I had kept
Mhm.
revised, my statement of faith, my identity statement. And I
Yeah.
actually write my identity statement in my book. And it ultimately is about helping people realize their potential. And I said, what can I do in corporate America to still do what I'm doing? Now, I've shifted yet again, still in this corporate world,
Yeah.
but in a different way. And right here, what am I wanting to do with you and your audience? I want to help people realize their potential. I want
Yeah.
you, listener, to know that the decisions you make affect your future and affect the lives of those around you. But the decisions that you made that did not work the way that you wanted to can be redeemed, can be renewed, and you can stand out again. And that it really starts with, who are you? Look at who you are. Look at your strengths. Look at your weaknesses. Accept some of those weaknesses. Improve other of those weaknesses. Appreciate things that you thought were weakness but are actually strengths. Set
Yes.
yourself into a path and make some decisions, small, gradual ones that lead you to a place of peace, of what Ken's calling enlightenment, of just feeling right, and that you look up and life is bright. There'll be ups and downs, but that's why the friends and the support and podcasts and places like this are great ways to encourage you. And I always tell people this, Ken, like my big mantra is, where you are is not where you have to stay. So if you're
Yep.
nervous on stage, you don't have to stay nervous on stage. If you're afraid, you don't have to stay afraid. If you're depressed, you don't have to stay depressed. If you're lonely, you don't have to stay lonely. If you're bored, you don't have to stay bored. If you are at the top of the world, but you feel like
Yeah.
something's missing, you don't have to have something that's just missing. So where you are is not where you have to stay, but it starts with knowing where you are and who you are, and then you can map out the path to get there.
Mike, I want to thank you, man, for coming. This is some really good stuff. I tell people the same in my journey as well, that the beginning is the beginning. It doesn't matter where you begin. So you just need to take the step and get you said, like you said, the purpose of a coach or a counselor is to help you to recognize a few things. They're going to ask you some questions that you didn't think about it because they've been there, and they'll be able to notice a few things. And the purpose of the counselor is simply to assist you to see the greatness that lives within you, and you will recognize it, and you will walk forward, and you will become into a space that I call purposeful decisions that will bring purposeful results. You're going to switch from just being autopilot, and you're now going to begin to have a purposeful decision-making life. And when you get to that space, it is a space of power, control, love, respect of self. All of those things are housed when you begin to make a purposeful decision, living, and life. Mike, I want to thank you. I know you're pressed for time, and thank you so much, sir, for coming to Threads of Enlightenment. This has been a beautiful conversation. All that is listening, get into Mike's space. Get his books. I'm going to help you out. I'm going to provide all of those things. Get into his class, whatever he has, because the man has the stuff that will help you to get to your next level, because you've been listening for over 30 minutes. Mike, again, thank you so much for coming.
Hey, Ken, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.